So in this video I am going to explain how I produced the sound of ice breaking in the piece of music called Floe, which was in a very early video on this channel. If you want to check it out, there will be a card up there and a link in the description. Now in that video, as well as a piece of music, I also explained a little bit about the setup of my 1980s studio, such as it was. Now for this piece of music I wanted the sound of ice breaking, of ice shearing off a glacier, of ice splitting and cracking. And at the time there wasn't any internet, home computers were just starting to take off, so there wasn't a box as such to think outside, so I had to come up with a way to create this ice breaking sound. And in that early video I asked if you wanted to play the game, if you could work out how I created the sound of ice breaking. Now if you didn't see the video but want to know what I'm talking about, then I'm going to play just a few seconds of the introduction from Floe, which just features the sound that I used for ice breaking. Now to my ears in the 1980s that was as close as I could get to what I considered to be the sound of ice breaking, shearing off glaciers, big icebergs being split apart. Now I wanted to show you how I did it by holding up the material that I used, but I actually can't find any. Now what I used was, now if you want to play the game, if you want to try to work out how I did it, pause the video. Welcome back. What I used was a piece of expanded polystyrene. Now if you are of a certain age, and by that I mean a young age, you may not know what expanded polystyrene is. I've no idea what your experience of packaging materials is, but in the 1980s and the 1990s and probably in the 2000s as well, it was probably the most common packaging material in use. It was used to package virtually every consumer item, from toasters and kettles right through to keyboards. It was very light, it was easy to mold, and I'm assuming it was very cheap. Now I've had a look in all my boxes for a piece of expanded polystyrene and I can't find any. Manufacturers today seem to use a sort of honeycomb plastic which doesn't have the squeaky properties that expanded polystyrene did, or still does. I'm assuming that this new plastic material is either cheaper or more eco-friendly. Now two very annoying features of expanded polystyrene was the fact that it had a tendency to break and flake off, and if you took something out of the box that was packed with expanded polystyrene, little bits of the white stuff which would go all over the floor, and it was a devil to remove, and you really had to get the vacuum cleaner out and make sure that everything was swept up. The other annoying feature, which I put to good use, was that if you twisted it or moved it, it used to squeak. It was a little bit like chalk on a blackboard. Now if you do remember expanded polystyrene, you may be thinking that the sound on Floe is not the sound of expanded polystyrene being twisted. It is far too low. So there is the second clue. Yes, it is far too low. Expanded polystyrene tended to produce a chalk on blackboard type effect. Now before I hit upon the idea of using expanded polystyrene for its creaky abilities, I did try a few other things. I tried a squeaky door hinge, but that really didn't have the variation in tone, and it was a very short sound which I would have had to record again and again and again, bearing in mind that I didn't have a digital audio recording system. I also tried, of course, the most obvious thing you can think of, which is putting ice into a glass of water. And you undoubtedly recall that when you pop an ice cube into a drink, it often goes crack. Which is the sort of sound that I wanted, but the sort of one or two little cracks that, again, just really wasn't going to do it. I wanted something that was organic, something that was going to last throughout the length of the piece. So as the creaky expanded polystyrene itself was too high pitched, I had to pitch it down, and Yes, that was easy enough to do, even back in the day using my TIAC A3440 multi-track tape recorder. It could record at two speeds. One was 15 inches per second, the other one was 7.5 inches per second. So I recorded the creaks at 15 inches per second, and then I recorded the music at 7.5 inches per second, which resulted in the creaks being slowed down to what I thought was a reasonable approximation of ice breaking. So that's essentially it. Now, of course, with our wonderful digital audio workstations, we can speed up and slow down and change the pitch of any piece of digital audio without affecting any of the other factors. And I am not going to search for a perhaps more authentic sound of ice cracking. Ice Floe was a recording of the 1980s, and that is where it is going to stay. Now, if there is any takeaway from this for us in the 21st century, I would say it is simply that recording an organic source can create a far more interesting sound, or backdrop in fact, than synthesized or looped sounds. Now, one of the features of this ice breaking sound in Ice Floe is that no section of this was looped. It never repeated itself. It was never the same twice throughout the entire length of the piece. So maybe that's something you'd like to think about when you're producing sounds and designing backdrops and loops and so on. Variation, I think, is good, and it holds the listener's interest, even with abstract sounds such as ice breaking. So if you found this interesting, which I hope you did in some sort of weird way, then please do consider subscribing to the channel, ring the bell so you get informed of new videos as soon as I release them. Hit the big thumb. And as always, I really do appreciate you taking the time to watch these videos and listen to my music. So for that, thank you very, very much indeed. And I will see you again in the next video.